Hello, this is Angela with Permaculture. Welcome back to my channel. It is a chilly December day here, and I'm not in my own garden, but I am in Portland, Oregon. I am up at my parents' garden doing some work here. I wanted to talk briefly while it is nice and crisp and really feels like the holidays out. I know some of our friends slightly north of us in Vancouver, Washington, and up toward Olympia had snow this morning, and we might be getting snow tonight, which maybe those of you in the Midwest or in New England are like, Angela, why are you getting excited about snow? But it actually doesn't snow that much here. And so the kids and I get excited if there's even a dusting. I wanted to talk today about 3 things you can do for your garden in December. For most of us, our garden in December is resting. There's not that much to do. Perhaps where you live, your garden is covered by a blanket of snow. Perhaps it's just too rainy and muddy for you to get much done in the garden. Perhaps it's too cold for anything to be growing. Now, I do have some overwintered vegetables. Some years I bother to put out cold frames, and some years I'm just too busy to kind of extend the life of the greens in my garden. I do have things growing in my greenhouse. In fact, I might cut in a picture here. My lemon tree is one of my 2 lemon trees is producing really well right now. But for many of us, December is a time where we are not focused out in the garden. We're looking inward to the home. We're looking to holiday celebrations. We're nestling down by the fire and focusing on perhaps family or crafts inside the house. Perhaps it's knitting. Perhaps it's much more time spent reading. And that gets me to my first thing that we can do for the garden. The first thing you can do for your garden in December is to learn more about it. It's a great season to hunker down with a book and dive in more to permaculture philosophy and design. There are so many good resources. In fact, I have a reading list I'll link to down below of books I have read and recommend on permaculture design and sort of organic design and sustainable gardening in general. This is a time when we can devote more hours to reading. There's less to do in the garden. I know for me, I read very little in the summer because despite the long hours, I'm super busy outdoors. I want to be outside maximizing my time in the garden. And here in the Pacific Northwest, the sun sets at about 4:30 in the afternoon this time of year, and the daylight hours are few, and I have many dark hours in the house where I could either be listening to an audiobook or I could be reading a book and kind of expanding my knowledge base so that I'm still thinking about the garden. I'm still investing in the garden even if I'm not outside. The second thing that you can do for your garden this time of year is to observe. To just sit back and say, I'm gonna take a break from interacting because the garden doesn't really need me this time of year. There's not very much that the garden is asking of me this time of year. So I can step back and focus on that permaculture principle, observe and interact, especially the first half of it, observe. What can I see happening in the garden that can not only teach me more about the needs of my actual system, but what can it teach me about overall design for life, overall design for resilient permaculture systems? In permaculture, one of the design principles that we use is designing from patterns to details. And that skill of observation really helps us notice the patterns and the details. It really helps us step back, as I've said many, many times, step back, zone out, look at the big picture, and then from there, step inward and notice the small little details. And how does all of that help your design? There's so much we can do just looking at the big picture in our garden and then taking time to just walk the garden and notice small little details that might pass us by in a different season when we're really busy planting or we're really busy harvesting and preserving food. We aren't rushed by those things this time of year. So we have more time to slow down and observe and say, what can the garden teach us? What can we fold into our knowledge base purely through observing in the garden, and how can that make us better and more resilient permaculturists? I would say as a tag on to that, maybe like a 2B, is think about the way you can create art from your garden in the winter. How can your garden inspire you to be a creative person? What can you observe that you can then transfer into sketches or watercolors or poetry that can help you focus on the beauty and abundance in your garden? And not only that, but also the senescence of the garden, because that's what we're dealing with in December. And how can that help you focus on the cycles of the garden year and the cycles that exist within the 12-month calendar, but also in the greater, again, step back, within the greater cycle of our lives and the greater cycle of the life of the garden, because our garden will live far beyond our own personal lifespan. We're designing for permanent agriculture. And so we want to think about those different scales of cycles. And for me, one way that I really am able to appreciate and notice those things more is when I take time to sketch things that I'm seeing in the garden. I know that's true for my eldest kid, Ruth. All of those observations come through in your artwork, in your sketches, in maybe even prose that you write about your garden. Because we're observing and we're putting on paper, we may not even really be able to consciously realize what we're observing until it comes out on the page. So just something to think about. And lastly, number 3, which is perhaps a little bit of a deviation from the first 2. Consider doing nothing at all for your garden in December. Consider taking a break. Consider investing in yourself, in your home, in the folks in your household. Consider taking a rest. Your garden is resting. You can rest too. I think there can be a bleed over from the frantic kind of productivity in our culture into our permaculture, and we need to push back against that. And so even though I often talk about, like, what should you do this month in your garden? You aren't obligated to do any of that. And in fact, in December, the garden is communicating to you, we are not asking much from you. We don't actually have to ask anything from you. You can just take a break, enjoy your holidays, enjoy your quiet time, enjoy sitting by the fire, and come back to us in January when it's time to prune the orchard, when it's time to thumb through seed catalogs. But take a break this month if that's what works for you. Don't feel pressure to have to be focused on your garden all the time. Permaculture is about permanent agriculture, but that doesn't mean it has to be omnipresent in your thoughts and in your actions. So feel free to take a break and get some rest for yourself. So I'm actually going to go inside and sit by the fire. My hands are so cold, I can't feel them. Thank you to those of you who continue to support this channel through Patreon, and to the rest of you for watching, thank you so much. And I'll be back really soon. Bye.